In Touch with Tampa Bay, connecting to our community, a public affairs feature of the CBS radio stations dealing with topics and issues that affect all of us here in the Bay Area. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this radio station or of CBS Radio.
I'm Beecher Martin for In Touch with Tampa Bay, and today we're talking about Tampa Bay History Center. And the location is 801 Old Water Street, and we'll get into explain where all that is. I'm talking to C.J. Roberts, the Frank E. Duckwall, President and CEO of Tampa Bay History Center. New building, traveling exhibit, you've got a research library, really kind of interesting, and you've got some permanent exhibits. Let's start with the traveling exhibit. It's about cowboys, and I'm sure you know the history behind the crackers, but I'll let you tell the story since you've got the exhibit.
Well, it's a great story, and it's one of many surprising stories that people who visit us are sort of taken aback by. It's what we call an aha story when people realize that the cattle industry really starts in Florida. Cattle are introduced here in the 1520s by Ponce de Leon, brought them over from Spain. Florida sees some of the first cattle drives. Even today, Florida remains one of the largest cattle-producing states in the country, and people just don't realize that. They don't realize that Frederick Remington was actually in Florida drawing cowboys too, and of course the origin of the cracker, which most would say ties back to the whips that the cattlemen used primarily to communicate with each other in the swamps and the hammocks, as well as to move the cattle along. And so they're great stories associated
Get them out
with
of
that.
all those palmetto heads.
Yep.
Am I correct? And I've heard this for years and years, being a native Floridian. I've always heard that the first cattle ranch was on Payne's Prairie at one end or the other, and that they've dug up the remains of pens and what appeared to be a working cattle ranch, which would go back to the Spaniards who brought cattle over and ran them in a ranching fashion before the western ranches ever came around.
And again, we talked about those aha moments, and what a surprise that the state has that kind of rich history. A lot of people think that maybe Florida has no history before Disney, but Your Own Family Story is a great example that's pretty far from the truth.
Talk about the permanent exhibits. Is this just Tampa focused?
It is not. We're a regional history museum. We draw our story from an area that comprises about 24 counties in west central Florida, and those boundaries are defined by what were the original boundaries of historic Hillsborough County, mid-19th century. Hillsborough County was broken up a number of times over the years, counties carved out and the like, but so we use that original Hillsborough County area as the area from which we draw our stories, and we're telling stories that span a period of about 12,000 years. We start by introducing our visitors to the original inhabitants of the area. They were, by the way, not Seminole Indians, but principally Timucuan and Tocobagan tribal Indians. They were cultures that had built mounds all over the peninsula, including what is now downtown Tampa. Almost all of those ceremonial mounds were leveled in the 19th century, and the contents were used for various infrastructure project, fill, and the like. Every once in a while, someone will be building a parking lot or a condominium or something like that, and they'll unearth some terrific pottery shards or spear or arrow points, and so we know a little bit about who those people were.
Yeah, Fort Brooke parking garage is a good
Great example.
Hence the birth of the Seminole gaming
and there goes another
industry.
Of those stories that one story kind of leads to the next.
Sure.
It was also those cultures that came in contact with the Spanish explorers who would come here. And this area sees some of the first exploration by Europeans anywhere in the country. We tell the story of the Narvaez expedition specifically. That's an expedition that comes here in 1528. They come ashore some 400 conquistadors strong. They're principally looking for gold. They almost immediately come in conflict with the natives who are here. The natives suggest that they make their way north, plenty of gold up north, and these conquistadors head that way. Long story short, some 8 years later, 4 survivors of that expedition would make their way back to Mexico, and in so doing become some of the first Europeans to cross any part of what would become the continental United States. And that story unfolds here almost a century before Jamestown and Plymouth colonies and names that we're so familiar with. And
Sure.
it's our story, and it's our history story, so it's a fun one to tell. We also talk a lot about the Seminoles. Tampa, of course, traces its origins back to Fort Brooke, which was built as a staging area to support the military efforts during the Seminole Wars. So it's natural for us to spend time talking about the Seminoles. We're also very fortunate in that we have a very strong collection of Seminole-related artifacts, one of the finest collections around. We have an immersive theater where we tell the story of a Seminole war chief, and it's really one of the gems of the show. This Seminole war chief named WQYK, who was a contemporary of Osceola's. He was seemingly at all of the key moments of the Second Seminole War. He and Osceola were captured and imprisoned together in Fort Marion and St. Augustine. They would break out of prison. WQYK would be recaptured, brought back to Fort Brooke, placed on a brig in Tampa Bay, and finds himself bargaining for his life with the authorities here. He is told that if he doesn't recall his warriors from the swamps and the hammocks in X number of days, he's going to be hanged. He is successful in at least recalling enough of his warriors to satisfy the authorities here. His reward is he's taken to Egmont Key. He's reunited with his family, whom he thought had perished in an earlier conflict, placed on another brig, shipped to New Orleans to ultimately become part of the Trail of Tears and the relocation of a majority of Seminoles from this area. Powerful, powerful story. It was documented by a young junior officer stationed at Fort Brooke named John Sprague, who was really fairly sympathetic and surprisingly objective to what was going on around him, given his viewpoint as an American Army officer. He would leave the military.
Or his trained viewpoint, anyway.
Indeed. He would leave the military, and in the late 1840s, he would publish a book about the Seminole War experience in Florida. And so we were able to use primary source materials to bring WQYK's story to life. And we combined a great story with some wonderful technology. We've outfitted a theater that's full of three-dimensional, life-size diorama elements that are complemented with audio-visual kind of footage to really take the visitor to another place and time and immerse them in this story. So
so we're not talking about just walking through and looking at a few pictures and stuff like that.
We didn't want to do that. We know that the public is
a little
no
more
longer
sophisticated at this point.
Absolutely. The
Well,
bar
to put
has
it
been
another
raised.
way, our span of attention seems to get shorter and shorter sometimes.
Well, you're right, and we saw that when we were putting together all of the AV pieces within the exhibit. Most of our shows are 15 minutes or less.
Right.
20 years ago, that might have been a half-hour show, and
Right.
so
Oh, yeah.
we're being challenged to tell more and more stories in shorter periods of time, and so there have to be some whiz-bang elements to it. There have
Sure.
to be some interactive and engaging components, and so we didn't want to build a flat, static museum with cases just full of stuff. We wanted something
you're definitely competing with television and movies
Sure.
today.
Sure.